Um, I will introduce our speaker. Jaymelynn Farney, again, as I talked about last night, she's one of the people that kind of helped in developing this partnership and hopefully the continued partnership and cooperative effort to hold these events annually. Um, but she is a Kansas State University Beef Systems Extension Specialist at Parsons, Kansas, at the research station there with Kansas State University Research and Extension. And she's going to talk about incorporating summer annuals into your cattle grazing system. And so some of the research, I've actually heard some of this research, and she may have some more that she's going to discuss about some of the research they've been doing there at that station related to incorporating summer annuals into their cattle grazing system, incorporating them into perennial grasses. And so with that, the floor is yours, Jaymelynn.
Thank you for that introduction, Patrick, and thank you everybody for being on the Zoom tonight. And sorry I missed it last night. I was planning on there, and we are interviewing for a new sheep and meat goat specialist for the state of Kansas, and our interviews ran long. So I'm looking forward to listening to the talk because as some of the information I'll present, we were not immune to the drought there in the southeast corner of Kansas. And one of the cool things and why I appreciate getting to visit and working in this partnership with Missouri is where I am located, my research station. We are more Missouri, more, Southwest Missouri, Northeast Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas, Northeast Oklahoma in regards to our production systems as compared to the rest of Kansas. So I do appreciate getting to talk with folks about fescue because fescue is a dirty word in especially our tall grass native range. One of the deals, and I'm probably speaking to the, preaching to the choir here, fescue is a very predominant forage. And it offers a lot of tremendous benefits to a cattle production system. It's what I like to call tolerant of anything. It can be mismanaged tolerant. It can be drought tolerant. It can be flood tolerant. A bunch of different things. And, it was a really cool talk that I went to not long ago that it was called the wonder grass because it was one of the few things that was actually green during the winter. And so offers a tremendous amount of opportunities for our operations. But there are some issues, especially if you have the toxic varieties of fescue in your operation. Everybody immediately jumps to fescue foot and those type of issues. But I think some of more of our economic issues, slighter reductions in pregnancies or loss of more pregnancies through the season for the cow-calf guys, discounts for that, the fescue look for those calves. Those are probably more of an issue, I think, for our fescue cattle versus just actually losing hooves, tails, etc. And in particular, that summer quality time during that summer slump, that's when particularly our cow-calf operations have some issues, especially if you are a spring calving operation. And, most of the cows are spring calving. We do see in the fescue belt that we're starting to shift more to the fall calving operation. And when you really look at it, and I didn't want to go off into the weeds too far, but I do have some pretty good research projects that I found that really show the economic and animal performance benefits to going fall calving on a fescue operation, especially if you are toxic type of fescues. So how do we combat some of these fescue issues? Well, one of the first things that's successfully been found to manage for our cow-calf operations in particular, just graze a different forage. Be able to put 2/3 of your operation in fescue, 1/3 of it into another warm season perennial like Bermuda grass is one way to do that. A lot of things they've seen in spring calving herds in particular that you can increase pregnancy rates a minimum of 15% by breeding your cows on something other than toxic Kentucky 31 fescue. Supplementation, to a degree, some of the research shows that you can increase pregnancy rates. If you keep feeding it, does it end up helping in regards to calf weaning weights for that spring herd? And of course, dilution is the solution to fescue toxicity pollution. And adding legumes is one option. And, not being in person, I'm not getting to do my poll like I like to do. But for the cow-calf guys, legumes added into your fescue pastures are actually economically viable option. There's been several bits of research that's shown that even though you might see some improvements in cattle gains with legumes, it's pretty spotty. And from the cost of legume establishment, sometimes it doesn't necessarily pay for the stocker operations. So, what are some other options to offset summer slump issues with fescues? And so that's where I did my research project. And I'm going to give you, very detailed information about this project, and then spend the rest of this time we have just discussing other things that have been found to work or not work. Just pick the brain, discuss options between ourselves. So the objective of this study that I'm going to present is to evaluate our heifer gains per acre, and forage production with 4 different summer grazing systems on replacement heifers. Now, I'm just going to present 3 years of data. I have a 4th year, but I'm still analyzing it. The research station, our cows are fall-born, predominantly Angus. Over the 3 years, we've had 142 heifers put through these different grazing systems. They're weaned in early to mid-April. Fairly lighter weight heifers going on to grass. And we tried to start grazing in mid-April to about the beginning of May. So our treatments, the different things that we were looking at. So we had fescue, and actually, I was talking about toxic fescue. We actually used novel fescue in these studies. And those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with that terminology, novel means that it is a fescue variety that has the endophyte organism, so the fungi in it, but that fungi doesn't produce the toxins. And so that's where we see issues with Kentucky 31 or Kentucky tall fescue, the 31, is that it's got that same fungi called endophyte, that it produces toxins that lead to negative effects in cattle. So luckily we have a bunch of good geneticists and others who've been looking at it. And first thing that is, they try to get rid of the fungi. Well, when they did that and have endophyte-free fescue, it doesn't have quite as good stand persistence, especially as compared to the Kentucky 31. So they thought, well, let's keep the fungi in for its symbiotic relationship with that fescue, and then get rid of the toxins. So that's where the novel came in. So that's what we ended up using in our studies here. They are 4-acre pastures, so I had 2 of those, and I stocked them with 4 head of those heifers and grazed them continuously through the whole period. And we were comparing that to another perennial grass, a Bermuda grass, which is a warm season. We had 3 pastures of those, once again, 4 acres each, but we stocked them with 5 head of heifers and rotationally grazed those every 28 days. So each of those pastures were split in half, and we rotated every 28 days. So the actual stocking rate on that time frame was about 0.6 cows or heifers per acre within that paddock at that time. Then we also had crabgrass, which is a warm season annual. We had 3 pastures of those, and we stocked them with 4 head each, and also rotationally grazed those every 28 days. Now, you can see I put in there perennial crabgrass because we did go ahead and let it go to seed, mow it, scuffed it up to try and reseed it naturally, but we still went ahead and broadcast about 5 pounds of Big and Quick every year. And then our 4th treatment was sorghum Sudan that was interseeded into our fescue pasture. So we had 2 pastures of those. Once again, it was 4 acres total. We rotationally grazed that in 3 paddocks stocked it anywhere between 6 to 8 head from April through June. And then July until when we thought that there wasn't enough forage to sustain growth, we would stop grazing. So what did that actually look like? And luckily, the Google Earth came and took a great picture when we had this study going. So you can see how these 10 paddocks are laid out here at our research station. So the first 2 paddocks that are highlighted in purple, those were our fescue pastures that were continuously grazed the whole time. And then we had 3 pastures of the Bermuda grass, and you can see we did cut them diagonally. And so those cattle would graze in one side of the diagonal for 28 days and then rotate to the other side for the next 28 days and then back and forth. You also see that same diagonal pasture split with the crabgrass pastures. And then for our fescue pastures that we interseeded our sorghum sedan in, like I said, we split those into 3 paddocks. So they were each about 1.3 acres. And, you know, we had paddock A there on the south side, B in the middle, and C in the north side. So in 2020, we actually had pretty good moisture through that whole time. So we were able to graze in that system for 213 days. 21, 22 weren't great moisture years. 2021, we actually were building the ark in May and had a little bit of rain in June and a little bit at the beginning of July. And then after that, nothing until the following May. And then 2022 was extremely dry. And so all of those heifers ended up coming off of grass around the first part of October. And we individually weighed all these heifers at different time points. Now, the part that was the most labor intensive of this was our sorghum sedan pasture management. And so I just wanted to really kind of iterate what we did, how we physically were able to do this project. So we heavily grazed those pastures from April until the first part of June. And by heavily grazed, it was about half of a head per acre. You know, so we were running, like I said, 6 to 8 head on that 1.3 acres for about 2 weeks. And then we would mow it to a 3-inch height, just kind of get a nice, smooth, even 3-inch height across there. And then we drilled with 25 pounds of our sorghum sedan seed. And then, you know, while, you know, those heifers grazed in paddock A and then they moved over to paddock B, we let them graze it for about 2 weeks, mowed it to the 3 inches of height, planted it. Then they moved to paddock C and stayed there until paddock A was about 2 foot tall. The sorghum sedan in there was about 2 foot tall. Now, the reason that we did that is I did not want to kill any of my heifers due to prussic acid issues. And so one of the best ways to minimize prussic acid potential in those is to let it get at least 2 foot tall, graze it until there's about 8 inches of stubble left, and that allows you to get your regrowth. But you only graze that a maximum of 10 days before you start getting new shoots in there. And so that's why we kind of held them there until paddock A was about 2 foot tall. And then once they were out of that pasture, then we would plant it with seed. And then I kind of told you so that we didn't kill our heifers. We only stayed in each paddock once it was 2 foot tall for 10 days and then rotated to the next one. And once we saw some emergence of our sorghum sedan plants, then we fertilized everything with 47 pounds of actual N. So for those of you who are more visual in your learning, this is what it actually looked like. So we had paddock A, and this is first part of April. Well, sorry, this is about the end of April. We grazed it for 2 weeks, mowed it, drilled our sorghum sedan. So we grazed it for 2 weeks. Then the heifers moved into paddock B. We mowed it and drilled it, allowed the heifers to graze out of paddock B for 2 weeks, moved them into paddock C. Once they moved into paddock C, then we mowed it, drilled it. And then once they were in paddock C, in the good moisture years, they only grazed 2 weeks and then rotated back to paddock A once our sorghum sedan was 2 foot tall. In our dry years, they still only stayed in there about 3 weeks before our paddock A was back up to 2 foot tall. And then once we were on our sorghum sedan, we reduced our heifer numbers to just 4 head at the time. And then they would graze each paddock for 10 days before they would rotate on. Now, we probably could have ran more cattle because in good moisture years, we actually had so much residual sorghum sedan in those fields or those pastures that we hate them. So this just shows you kind of what our pastures looked like. And this was pictures from this past year, actually 2023, taken in the middle of July. Our first pasture, our crabgrass, and I put AKA foxtail. Unfortunately, we had a very, very heavy infestation of foxtail. Not the desirable kind of foxtail, but when I get to the results, it was very interesting that wasn't as much of an issue as I had thought it would be. And then our Bermuda grass pastures there on the right-hand side. And the pictures that were taken here, it's kind of hard to see with the way I took the picture. But these are right before we were about to turn our heifers in on that 28-day rotation. So this is like day 27 of them on that other paddock, and then when they came back to this one. So the rotational grazing was wonderful for our crabgrass and Bermuda grass. It did allow us to accumulate and be able to sustain a much better pasture. And that Bermuda grass stand that you see there, it had 3 years of extreme drought, and we still grazed it with 5 head on 4 acres, rotationally grazed back and forth, or even less than that if you wanted to say that 28 days they were 5 head on 2 acres, and then 28 days there's another 5 head on 2 acres. What did our sorghum sedan interseeded into our fescue pastures look like? And so interestingly enough, it didn't matter whether we started drilling in paddock C, B, or A. Within our 4-acre pasture, paddock A, there on that south side, and both of those pastures looked like that. It almost looked like a pure field, a tilled up field drilled with sorghum sedan, just thick and beautiful. Paddock B had decent growth, was pretty patchy, but our paddock C's every time barely had any sorghum sedan growth into them. And this was very interesting to look at pasture differences, and we've started investigating soil profiles and differences in each of those 3, but that's just in 4 acres, how much difference that we saw. And when I took these pictures, every one of those, within a few days after we drilled, had 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch rain on each of those sorghum sedans. So they had the potential. There's something else. And unfortunately, a lot of folks see the same thing, that when you try to drill sorghum sedan into a perennial fescue, it's very, very patchy. So what about some of our results? So along the x-axis or the bottom there, the first 4 clusters is 2020 data, 2021, 2022, and then averaged across the whole thing. And, these heifers, want to make sure you hear this. These heifers were not supplemented with anything. This is just pure gains on grass. They were given a free choice mineral, but that was it. And, there was a little bit of variability in gain differences across years. But when you look overall, over the entire 3-year period, our sorghum Sudan fescue, representing kind of the yellow bar, those cattle, those heifers outperformed just the fescue in the purple bar, as well as our Bermuda grass heifers on an average daily gain basis. And our crabgrass were right there in the middle. And, that was very surprising to me because, like I said, we had a very, very heavy infestation of foxtail, and our heifers still gained well. And you could see that they only ate the crabgrass. They left the foxtail out there. So it'd be interesting to see what our gain differences would be if we had a pure stand of crabgrass. But what about gain per acre? Now, this is where we really see that advantage of being able to put the sorghum Sudan into our fescue as compared to just fescue alone. Those heifers we were able to stock much heavier during the growth season, or when, our fescue's really going at it. And then that sorghum Sudan sustained them for a longer period of time over the summer. And your Bermuda grass comes in second because of our stocking rate. Their gains weren't quite as good on an individual basis, but as is traditionally seen, the more animals on smaller acres you have, the lower individual average daily gain they'll have, but the greater gain per acre you will see. Now, what about available forage? And so we did measure how much forage was out there each month, and there's a lot of information here, and this is averaged over the 3 years. I'm going to highlight some specific things I think are worth taking home. One thing that was very interesting to us is in early April and May, our crabgrass pastures actually, which is an perennial annual, they actually got a much quicker jump start than our Bermuda did. And subsequently, I think that might also have been something that led to a little bit better performance with our crabgrass heifers as compared to the Bermuda, as they just had more available forage. Our fescue pastures, interestingly enough, had about the same amount of available forage through the entire grazing period, averaged over every year. And so, those heifers really, they ate what they wanted to eat, and that was it. Now, our sorghum Sudan, especially from, June when it actually started growing until October, because it is also a warm season annual. And once you get a freeze, it's done, it's dead. We did see that our cattle did utilize it very heavily. It started with a, almost 3 ton of dry matter per acre in June. But when we were done, we still had 3,000 pounds of dry matter per acre of dry stalks for those cattle to keep consuming. And these numbers for that sorghum Sudan fescue still include some hay being taken out of there. So this was very interesting, and I did not add our hay amounts back into this number. And, as you would expect, Bermuda and crabgrass, because they are warm seasons, they're done at the end. And we saw some regrowth of our fescue pastures in our sorghum Sudan in November, but not a very significant amount. So what does it cost? That's one thing that I think is very important when we're making our managerial decisions. What does it actually do to our pocketbook? So here's, I'm not an economist, so I didn't look to see if we do have an economist here, but this is just my cowboy math, my cowgirl math here. So averaged over our 3 years, our fertilizer cost was about $470 a ton. And just due to our differences in the type of fertility and everything that we implemented, that shows you what each of our fertility costs were in each of those systems. And I also included in there paying off your investment in your pasture. So, if you have a 15-year stand of fescue, that's how much your cost goes into it. Your crabgrass, if you're having to reseed it yearly, Bermuda grass, a 15-year stand. And I know we probably have more than 15-year stand, but that's what I arbitrarily picked as, a good productive stand. And then, I'd already mentioned a few times, sometimes our sorghum stand got way ahead of us. And so we ended up removing hay. So that's another cost, is with your custom harvesting. So what did we end up seeing? So our cost per acre was the highest in our sorghum sedan fescue system, lowest with just the fescue only. And the Bermuda grass one was high, mainly due to the initial investment in planting to Bermuda grass. That's what we ended up seeing. That's where you had the biggest cost right there. And because our Bermuda grass and crabgrass pastures, we fertilized exactly the same. They got 50 units of nitrogen in they got 100 total units of nitrogen in 2 doses, one in May, one in July. Now, in the next row, we do have non-cattle income per acre. So that was our hang. And I'm glad I had this here because I forgot to see our Bermuda grass with rotationally grazing every 28 days. It got ahead of us, even stocked with 5 head on 4 acres. So we did get hay off of our Bermuda grass pastures as well as our sorghum stand fescue. So what is our total cost minus our hay profit per acre? When you add in that hay, we actually start out making money from the get-go with that sorghum sedan fescue. And when you look at our gain per acre and cost of gain per acre, when you include being able to have a little bit of extra forage for hay, the advantage goes to our sorghum sedan fescue and our Bermuda grass. They still end up being your lowest cost of production or a cost of gain basis. But if you don't get any hay out of the system, it all kind of comes out as a wash until you get to crabgrass. And yearly planting of crabgrass ends up being your highest cost of gain. So that's one thing that really surprised me. I thought our added performance and gain that we get with our sorghum sedan, did it cover the cost of production? And yes, it does. If you have a good enough moisture year that you get extra hay off of the system. So our take homes, utilizing sorghum sedan can work. It does require additional management, especially don't kill your cattle due to prussic acid. You have to do rotationally grazing. Increasing rotations increases your grazing potential of warm season forages. So by that, I mean, when we did our rotational grazing on our Bermuda grass, normally we don't get hay off of it, but we had enough extra grass that we were able to get hay off of there. The sorghum sedan interseeded fescue increases our gain per acre, has the greatest gain per calf. And if you get some hay harvested off of that, you essentially can feed your calves for free over that summer period. Without the hay harvest, it costs the same as any other system. So thank you, and I will open the floor for any questions you may have.
So we've got a couple of questions. One is, what about the persistence of the fescue in the fields you drilled into, especially in the drought years?
That is a great question. And I'm gonna lose some of you because you're gonna be like, this girl doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm a beef person that's learning all the forage stuff, but a nutritionist that's feedlot nutritionist is working on forages. But through those incredible dry years, I don't know what was the magic thing, but when we mowed and rotationally grazed through that last summer, our sorghum Sudan fescue pastures still had fescue. They were still green, looked good, had a great stand. Our novel fescue pastures that were continuously grazed over that same 4-year period, they were dead. Like, I mean, we ended up having to pull the cattle off of those pastures because there was less than 25% live stands out there. So it was actually kind of opposite of what I thought I would see with those in crazy droughts. And so I really would love to try it a few more years because, yeah, I heard one of our most recent weather guys, meteorologists that make all the forecast, not the TV weather guys, the other researchers, but they are forecasting wet summer. So yay. But because those other fescue pastures that we had grazed continuously are completely dead, I'm not going to be able to repeat this project because even with a replanting them, they are not going to be sufficient to graze this summer. So, and so, from Micah's, to follow up with that, do you think the sorghum shaded it out during the extreme heat? If that's what did it, it may have had an impact. Like I said, there's been some stuff that I've seen because I've started trying to investigate to answer why this happened. Keeping the ground a little cooler might have helped, but I really think that it was rotationally grazing. Being able to have some of that rest rotation, it was my key to keeping that, even though we hit it harder earlier during the growth season. See, and Tim's question I see here, did you see grazing occur in the sorghum Sudan following the first freeze and after threat of prussic acid was over? So we were able to actually, lucked out that we rotated into those paddock C's that had no sorghum Sudan when we had our freezes. And so once we had a good kill and freeze, we kept those heifers in our paddock C where there was no sorghum Sudan for 10 days. And then we put them back through and let them graze that. And, that only happened one of the 3 years that I presented the data on, because all the rest of them, we were so dry, we had the cattle off before we actually had our kill and freeze. So like I said, we only had to worry about that 1 year, but that is something you need to take into account when you're thinking through your system, is having the ability to get those animals off of the sorghum Sudan to an area that does not have any. And I like to go at least 7 days. 10 days is an even safer level. See, another question from Tim. What brand of novel did you use? And also, do you recall what variety of Bermuda you used? Yes, and these are some long-term pastures. These have been this for at least 20 years. So the novel was Max Q, the original Max Q, and the Bermuda is Midland 99.
There's another question. Have you seen any systems use other summer annuals such as pearl millet?
Yes, and so Aaron, I appreciate your question, because one of the big advantages I think to using pearl millet as compared to sorghum Sudan is you do not have to worry about the prussic acid issues. Pearl millet does not have it, so you don't have to do the rotational grazing. You still get better performance and production doing rotational grazing with the pearl millet, but one of the things that we have seen, and I've been involved with, see here, and colleagues out in Nebraska. So we've had at the Parsons Center around Manhattan, out in Western Kansas, and 3 locations in Nebraska, where we just looked at forage production with comparing sorghum Sudan, forage sorghum, pearl millet, corn, and I'm forgetting the last one. I'm so embarrassed. It didn't work, so it's one of those. But we found that in all 6 of those locations, in all 6 of those locations, sorghum Sudan and forage sorghums were the only ones that were consistently able to generate any appreciable forage biomass. The pearl millet, when you have moisture, works well. If you do not have moisture, it is not near as drought tolerant as the sorghum Sudan and forage sorghums. And so that's one thing. And in years when you have sufficient moisture, the forage sorghum still and sorghum Sudan still out tonnage the pearl millet. So it's a balance. See, comment from Hunter. Have you thought about adding in a treatment of rotating on fescue only? Yes, I have. And in a perfect world, I should have had the continuous and the rotational grazing with those fescue. I still think we'd see an advantage to the sorghum Sudan, but the gap or the difference I think will be less attenuated with rotationally grazing of that fescue, because you'll keep it in a better system or better quality longer versus the continuous grazing. But I just didn't have enough land, didn't have enough pastures to be able to do both of those.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Micah made a comment. I think German millet is supposed to be more drought tolerant. Yes, it is supposed to be more drought tolerant. However, everything I have seen research-wise, it does not make near as much tonnage. And we've only utilized German millet in about 3 different plot studies, comparing it compared to pearl millet, sorghum Sudan, forage sorghum, and it consistently comes in last at half the forage production we get from forage sorghum and sorghum Sudan.
So any other questions this evening?
I guess
go ahead, Hunter.
Patrick, thank you. And maybe you mentioned this already. I'm sorry. But when you were planning putting the sorghum Sudan in, how deep in the ground were you aiming to get with that seed?
So we were trying to go for about 1/2 to 3/4 inch. So we went just a bit shallower than what they recommend as appropriate seeding depth, but I thought we had enough competition potential with the fescue that I wanted to give it as much chance as it could.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Jaymelynn? Not seeing any. I want to thank Jaymelynn for the talk tonight, the presentation tonight, and like I said, this will be recorded, or it is recorded, so you will receive a YouTube link tomorrow with it in case you want to see it again, or obviously somebody went on tonight, they would get that. I guess to move on to Thursday night, and Jaymelynn put her email and her phone number there in the chat, and I'll pass that along as well tomorrow when I send the email out. But as far as as far as moving on to Thursday night, just kind of a preview on it. We're going to have Dr. Thiago Martins. He's new to the University of Missouri MU Extension, and he's our new beef cattle reproduction specialist. And so he's going to talk about rebuilding the cow herd following drought. And so again, that'll be Thursday night starting at 7. You should have already received the Zoom links, but I'll make sure and send a reminder email out Thursday, and hopefully Dr. Martins will have his slides, and I will send that to you as well. And so again, want to thank everybody for being on tonight. Thank Jaymelynn for her help in this. And with that, I guess we're done for the evening, and hopefully you'll see you guys on Thursday night.